Chapter 1. The Soul Out of Body. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the sprawling city of Hyderabad. As the crimson hues of twilight painted the sky, chaos was unfolding on the outskirts of the metropolis. The scene was set for a deadly high-speed chase, and at its center was John Harper, a man on the run for his life. The deafening roar of an engine shattered the tranquility of the evening. It was a sleek black SUV, bearing the insignia of a private security company that had been engaged in sinister activities. Inside the vehicle, a group of security guards, faces masked by a grim determination, were determined to catch their elusive prey. John Harper had narrowly escaped from a clandestine science laboratory, where illegal experiments were being conducted on unwilling human subjects. His escape had been a harrowing journey through dimly lit hallways, past rows of ominous-looking apparatus, and through echoing chambers filled with the tormented cries of the lab's unfortunate test subjects. Now, with adrenaline coursing through his veins, John found himself navigating the outer ring road of Hyderabad at breakneck speed. The road, usually teeming with commuters at this hour, had cleared a path for this high-stakes cat-and-mouse game. The city's countless lights blurred into streaks of illumination as John's vehicle weaved through traffic. The black SUV, seemingly unrelenting in its pursuit, tailed John's every move. The guards inside, their faces illuminated by the harsh glow of the dashboard, communicated with steely efficiency. Their mission was clear: capture John Harper at any cost. John's heart pounded like a drum as he gripped the wheel. He glanced into the rearview mirror, catching a chilling sight of the menacing black SUV edging ever closer. Determined to break free, John's foot pressed down harder on the accelerator, and his vehicle surged forward with newfound vigor. The speedometer raced upward, the needle ticking toward 120 kilometers per hour. The wind howled through the open windows, ruffling John's hair and making his heart race even faster. He felt the tremendous power of the engine coursing through the vehicle, giving him the edge he so desperately needed. The chase continued through the urban sprawl, the neon lights of the city forming a mesmerizing backdrop to this deadly dance. John's focus remained unwavering as he skillfully navigated the chaotic traffic, expertly threading his way between slower vehicles, narrowly avoiding disaster at each turn. The security guards were relentless, their SUV mere meters away from John's rear bumper. He could hear their shouts over the din of the pursuit, their taunts and threats only fueling his determination to escape their clutches. The pursuit raged on, the dark highway stretching out before them like an endless, winding serpent. John Harper's heart pounded, and sweat dripped down his brow as he fought to maintain control of his speeding vehicle. The city's lights, a blend of blurs and streaks, surrounded him, almost surreal in their luminance. The deadly high-speed chase between John Harper and the relentless security guards continued, a life-and-death struggle on the unforgiving streets of Hyderabad. The outcome remained uncertain, but one thing was clear: John was willing to do whatever it took to evade capture, and the security guards were just as determined to bring him back to the nightmarish laboratory from which he had escaped. The night would decide their fates, and the city bore witness to their thrilling, heart-pounding pursuit. The relentless high-speed chase had taken a sinister turn as John Harper continued to speed away from the pursuing security guards. Fear and adrenaline coursed through his veins as he tried to outrun his pursuers. Desperation was etched on his face, and his grip on the wheel was vice-like, but the security guards were equally desperate, and their intentions were far from noble. In the SUV, the security guards were growing increasingly frantic. Their mission to capture John had taken a dark twist, and they were willing to do anything to silence him and keep their illegal activities hidden. One of the guards, his hands trembling, reached for a firearm on the seat beside him. With the window rolled down, he aimed the weapon out of the moving vehicle, desperate to eliminate John and any potential threat he posed. The sound of gunshots shattered the relative quiet of the chase. The guards opened fire, their shots ringing out through the night air. Bullets whizzed past John's vehicle, narrowly missing him. The road lit up with flashes of gunfire, a deadly dance of pursuit and evasion that could have catastrophic consequences. With bullets whizzing by and fear gripping him, John knew he had to do something drastic to escape this perilous situation. In a split-second decision, he made a desperate maneuver, swerving his car to the side and crossing an intersection, ignoring the red traffic signal. But this rash decision would prove to be his undoing. As he sped through the intersection, he failed to notice an oncoming truck. It was a massive, lumbering vehicle, and the driver had no time to react to the sudden appearance of John's car in its path. The truck collided with John's vehicle, its sheer force sending it hurtling through the air like a toy, flipping and somersaulting before crashing back to the ground. The impact was devastating. John's car was obliterated, the force of the collision tossing him nearly 20 feet through the air before he landed on the unforgiving asphalt. His body lay motionless, blood pooling around him, staining the road crimson. The cacophony of the city was momentarily drowned out by the deafening silence that hung in the aftermath of the collision. The security guards, who had come to a screeching halt in their SUV, stared in shock at the horrifying scene. They had not intended for things to end like this, but their desperation had driven them to use deadly force, inadvertently leading to a tragic accident. As realization slowly dawned upon them that John was motionless, one of the guards reached for his phone and dialed a number. The voice on the other end belonged to their shadowy and ruthless boss, the mastermind behind the illegal experiments conducted in the lab. He had been eager to ensure John's silence, and upon hearing the news, a wicked smile crept across his face. His fear of exposure had been extinguished with a single phone call. Amidst the wreckage and the lifeless form of John Harper, the security guards looked at each other, their expressions a mix of relief and dread. They had achieved their grim objective, but at an unthinkable cost. The night had witnessed a chase, a desperate bid for survival, and ultimately, a tragic end on the unforgiving highway. As the night air hung heavy with the scent of tragedy and the echoing wails of sirens cut through the somber stillness, passers-by had quickly gathered around the scene of the fatal accident. Their faces bore expressions of shock and concern, and a sense of collective compassion filled the air. It was an eerie and chilling sight. John Harper lay lifeless on the cold pavement, his body contorted from the impact of the collision. Blood, stark against the asphalt, pooled around him, and his limbs lay at unnatural angles. A concerned crowd had gathered, their hushed voices a stark contrast to the chaos that had unfolded moments earlier. Among the gathered onlookers, someone had already dialed 911. The telltale wail of an approaching ambulance resonated through the night. Soon, the flashing red and blue lights illuminated the grim scene as the ambulance skidded to a stop. Paramedics in their distinctive uniforms leaped out, moving with a practiced urgency. They rushed to the lifeless body on the road. Kneeling beside John, one of the paramedics swiftly assessed the situation. With gloved hands, he gently placed 2 fingers on John's neck, searching for a pulse. His face grew solemn as he shook his head and met the gaze of one of the police officers who had arrived on the scene. "There's no pulse," he said, his voice heavy with the burden of delivering such grim news. The police officer nodded, his expression grave, as he prepared to carry out his duty in the grim aftermath of the accident. The paramedics gently covered John's lifeless body with a white sheet, shielding it from the prying eyes of the crowd. The police officer took a deep breath and began a methodical search of the body for any identification. He checked pockets, patting them down carefully, but found nothing. John Harper had no identification on him. The officer glanced around, realizing the gravity of the situation. Without identification, the task of notifying John's next of kin would be that much more challenging. In the dim glow of the ambulance's interior lights, he retrieved a small camera from his belt, and a series of photos were taken to document the scene and the victim's appearance. After completing this process, the officer made a decision. He carefully wiped his hands on a handkerchief and used it to clean the blood from his hands, a small act of closure amidst the chaos and tragedy. He then placed the handkerchief in his pocket, a memento of a night he would never forget. With the photos taken and no identification to be found, the officer and paramedics prepared to load John Harper's lifeless body into the waiting ambulance. The crowd watched in solemn silence as the doors of the vehicle closed, enveloping the scene in darkness once more. The ambulance pulled away, its flashing lights disappearing into the distance, leaving behind a lingering sense of sadness and unanswered questions. The police officer, his mind still weighed down by the events of the previous night, returned home after his shift. His house, a refuge from the relentless demands of his job, provided a semblance of normalcy in the midst of chaos. He kicked off his worn boots at the door, letting out a tired sigh. The familiar routine of unwinding after a long day was about to commence. Undressing, he carefully folded his uniform, placing it in a designated laundry basket. His clothes were stained with the grime and toil of his work, but the act of washing them was a symbolic cleansing, a way to rid himself of the burdens he carried. After a quick shower, he put his laundry in the washing machine, setting it to start before heading to bed. The next morning, the officer's responsibilities took on a new form as he dropped off his son at school. The morning sun was welcoming, a stark contrast to the darkness he often faced during the night shift. With a reassuring smile, he left his son, who carried his school bag and backpack filled with the day's necessities. Driving to the police station, the officer received a series of routine tasks for the day. One of the first duties was to clean and maintain the station's arsenal. In a secluded room, he meticulously wiped down the firearms, ensuring each one was in pristine condition. His care for the weapons mirrored his duty to protect and serve, and he knew the importance of having reliable tools. The officer took a short break for lunch, enjoying a quiet moment of solace in the police station's break room. The taste of the homemade meal his wife had lovingly prepared offered a comforting respite from the demands of the job. Soon after, he received a summons from the reception. It was time to collect the post-mortem report of John Harper, the unfortunate victim of the previous night's accident. With a heavy heart, he retrieved the report from the receptionist, the contents of which he would later relay to the station inspector. The inspector's office was a realm of authority, filled with the weighty decisions that shaped the course of their daily work. The officer entered, report in hand, and offered a respectful nod as he presented the findings. The inspector reviewed the document, his expression grave. "Thank you, officer," the inspector said, breaking the silence. "It's a tough part of our job, but we need to ensure that justice is served." With the report handed over, the officer received new instructions. There had been reports of a bar fight in a local tavern that required his immediate attention. Without hesitation, he headed to the scene. At the bar, the officer arrived to find a chaotic scene, with raised voices and shoving among patrons. The officer waded into the fray, his commanding presence diffusing the tension. He expertly separated the brawlers, ushering them away from the scene and warning them of the consequences of their actions. With the situation resolved, the officer took a moment to catch his breath. His day had been a whirlwind of emotions and duties, but it was far from over. After finishing his shift, he picked up his son from school, a reassuring smile on his face as he asked about his day. His son's eyes lit up as he recounted the adventures of his school day. "Dad, we played kabaddi in school today. It was so much fun," he exclaimed. The police officer couldn't help but smile, grateful for the brief respite from the challenges of his job, as he and his son headed home, finding comfort and connection in the everyday routines of life. The police officer's day had been long and tiring, filled with various tasks and challenges that came with the job. As the sun dipped below the horizon, he made his way back to the station for his final assignment. He had been informed that he had to deliver an important report to the commissioner's office, a task that would mark the end of his day's duties. Resolute, he headed to the commissioner's office, the weight of responsibility pressing on him. The report was delivered, and the commissioner expressed his gratitude for the officer's dedication before releasing him for the day. With a sigh of relief, he knew he could finally call it a day. The officer returned home, eager to leave the stress and demands of his work behind. As he entered his house, he began to unwind. His uniform was carefully placed in the laundry basket, awaiting a fresh start in the washing machine. He then took a soothing shower, cleansing both his body and his mind. The warm embrace of a home-cooked meal awaited him, and he savored every bite before retiring for the night. The next morning, an eerie silence enveloped the house. There was no movement, no signs of the usual morning bustle. The police officer's wife and son were still in their beds, their peaceful slumber seemingly unbroken. The house felt empty, the stillness only amplified by the absence of their usual sounds and voices. At the police station, concern began to grow as numerous calls to the officer went unanswered. The inspector knew something was amiss and sent another police officer to check on his colleague's home. The assigned officer, sensing the urgency of the situation, reached the house and knocked on the door. No response came from within. The police officer's motorcycle was parked in its usual spot, indicating that he was indeed at home. Growing increasingly worried, the visiting officer continued to ring the doorbell and knock loudly. The eerie silence hung heavily in the air, and it became evident that something was terribly wrong. With a mounting sense of dread, the visiting officer took a step back and assessed the situation. It was clear that the occupants of the house should have responded by now. The visiting officer made a fateful decision to break open the door with a powerful kick. The door swung open with a resounding crash, revealing the interior of the house. The visiting officer entered, calling out the name of his colleague, Arvind. But there was no response. He moved through the house, room by room, until he reached the bedroom. What he saw there would haunt him forever. In the dim morning light, he found the police officer, his wife, and their son lying in their beds, seemingly at rest. Their peaceful appearance masked the grim reality: they were lifeless, their stillness a chilling testament to the silence that had descended upon the house. The room was heavy with an atmosphere of loss and despair. Shocked and devastated, the visiting officer immediately called for backup and notified the station. An investigation into this heartbreaking tragedy would soon commence, unraveling the mystery of what had happened in the otherwise serene home. The day that had begun so quietly had taken a dark and tragic turn, leaving the police force and the community to grapple with the loss of one of their own, his family, and the unanswered questions surrounding their untimely demise. The discovery of the police officer, his wife, and their son, all found lifeless in their own home, sent shockwaves throughout the entire neighborhood. News of the tragic incident spread like wildfire, and soon, a crowd had gathered in front of the house. Their hushed conversations and solemn expressions painted a scene of collective grief and disbelief. As the authorities arrived to take the bodies for post-mortem examinations, the neighborhood watched in somber silence. The bodies were carefully placed in the waiting ambulances, and the police officer who had been assigned to investigate the case looked on with a heavy heart, eager to find answers to this perplexing tragedy. Back at the police station, the shocking news of the police officer's family's demise had sent ripples of disbelief and sorrow through the ranks. The men and women in blue who had known and worked alongside their fallen colleague were at a loss, struggling to make sense of the inexplicable. An officer was promptly assigned to investigate the deaths of the officer and his family, a solemn duty that would hopefully provide some clarity to the bewildered community. In the midst of this turmoil, the phones at the police station never stopped ringing. Call after call reported similar incidents of people found lifeless in their beds, a bewildering pattern that was both alarming and confounding. The reports flooded in from all corners of the city, overwhelming the station with a mounting sense of crisis. The perplexed police force reached out to the commissioner to inform him of the inexplicable situation. The commissioner, just as astounded, confirmed that they, too, had received numerous complaints and reports of similar incidents throughout the city. It was clear that something unprecedented and catastrophic was unfolding. With a sense of urgency, the police force, led by the dedicated officer assigned to the case of the fallen officer's family, would soon embark on a complex and challenging investigation to unravel the mystery that had gripped their city. In the coming days, the truth behind these tragic and inexplicable deaths would slowly begin to reveal itself, sparking fear, concern, and a collective search for answers within the community. The declaration of a pandemic in Hyderabad had plunged the city into an eerie silence and desolation. It was a situation that Aditi Rao, like many others, had never anticipated. The lockdown was comprehensive, and the entire city was effectively sealed off. No one could enter or leave the city, and the once vibrant streets had become barren and devoid of life. One morning, Aditi rose from her slumber, her normal routine disrupted by the startling changes that had befallen her city. She dressed for the day, her movements slow and deliberate as she tried to make sense of the situation. She decided to take her scooter and head to work, hopeful that some sense of normalcy might still exist despite the lockdown. As she ventured out onto the city's streets, the stark reality of the situation struck her with a jolt. There was not a single vehicle in sight, and almost every shop she passed was closed and shuttered. The once bustling roads and sidewalks were now empty, and the silence weighed heavily on her. It was a surreal experience, like stepping into a post-apocalyptic world. Aditi continued to navigate the deserted city, her scooter the only sound breaking the silence that had fallen over Hyderabad. She kept trying to call her friends, seeking some form of human connection in this surreal setting, but no matter whom she dialed, no one answered. The full city was ensnared in a haunting silence, as if all of its residents had vanished into thin air. The emptiness of the city was unsettling. Not only were there no people in sight, but even the birds and animals seemed to have retreated into hiding. The streets were devoid of the usual cacophony of urban life. There were no vendors hawking their wares, no honking horns, and no conversations between friends and strangers. It was as if Aditi was the sole survivor in a once vibrant metropolis. Aditi rode through the silent streets, trying to fathom the inexplicable transformation that had occurred. The city she had known and loved had been swallowed by an eerie and ominous stillness. The pandemic had left Hyderabad in a state of complete isolation, a city where life and activity had ground to a halt, leaving its bewildered residents to grapple with a new and haunting reality. Aditi's ride through the eerily silent city had left her both perplexed and unsettled. The sense of isolation, the absence of any human presence, had slowly enveloped her as she continued her journey through the deserted streets. After riding for hours, she realized that the city was in an unprecedented state of lockdown, like an eerie ghost town. Feeling both anxious and lonely, she was desperate for any sign of life. Just when her hope was nearly extinguished, she spotted a figure on the opposite side of the road. Her heart leaped as she recognized John Harper, who waved to her with a warm smile. The relief of seeing another living soul was palpable, and Aditi exclaimed, "Thank God, I'm not the only one alive. There's still hope for many in the city of silence." With newfound determination, Aditi headed back home. She lived by herself, and her sense of isolation had deepened during the long hours of her journey. Once home, she decided to check the news on TV, but to her surprise, no channel seemed to be working. Frustrated by her inability to connect with the outside world, she turned to music to fill the void left by the absent sounds of a bustling city. The day had taken a toll on her, and she decided to take a nap, hoping to escape the surreal reality that had enveloped her city. As she drifted off to sleep, the quietude of her surroundings seemed to deepen, casting an almost dreamlike quality to her slumber. When she awoke, she was surprised to find the city transformed. It was as if the pandemic had never happened. The streets were filled with people, shops were open, and the city had returned to its vibrant, bustling self. Aditi's heart swelled with joy at the sight of life returning to the streets. She couldn't believe her good fortune, her city was intact, and everything was as it should be. However, just as quickly as her sense of relief had arrived, it began to wane. Aditi realized with a sudden, crushing clarity that she had been dreaming. She had not experienced the return of normalcy, instead, she had merely slept away the eerie silence of the locked-down city. Distraught and disoriented, Aditi stumbled out of her house. The city remained in a haunting silence, devoid of human activity. She took her bike and ventured out into the streets once more, determined to find some semblance of life or a logical explanation for the inexplicable events of the past day. To her dismay, the result was the same: empty streets, closed shops, and an unsettling stillness that seemed to defy all reason. Aditi stood there, unable to come to terms with the reality that had settled over her beloved city, the city of silence, where not even a single living soul moved through its once vibrant streets. As the evening sun dipped below the horizon, Aditi returned to her home. The city's strange silence was unnerving, and the unsettling realization that it wasn't a dream had sunk in. She decided to cook a quick meal of instant noodles and settled in front of her laptop, hoping to pass the time with some stored movies since even the internet had been disrupted by the lockdown. As she browsed her laptop, she glanced at the date in the corner of her screen, and her heart skipped a beat. It showed the 30th of June, which was utterly bewildering to her. She had been convinced it was May. A wave of confusion and disorientation washed over her, and she shook her head, trying to dispel the growing unease. She rationalized that her exhausted brain must be playing tricks on her, skewing her perception of time. After finishing her meal and watching a few movies, she felt her eyelids growing heavy. She decided to call it a night and went to bed. An hour or so passed, and suddenly, Aditi found herself standing next to her sleeping body. She stared in shock at the scene before her, not quite comprehending what was happening. In a state of disbelief, she looked at the time, realizing that she had woken up from her sleep without realizing it. Confused and disoriented, she decided to go to the kitchen to get a drink of water. However, upon entering the kitchen, she had a sudden realization. She had left a bottle of water on her computer desk in the bedroom. She quietly slipped into the bedroom, moving towards the desk to retrieve the water bottle. However, as she reached out to pick it up, her hand passed through the physical object, and a wave of terror washed over her. She turned around and saw herself sleeping soundly on the bed. A blood-curdling scream escaped her lips, but her physical body remained undisturbed. In that moment, it became painfully evident that something had gone terribly wrong, and Aditi's existence had taken a nightmarish turn. Panic seized her as she tried to process the situation. She couldn't touch the water bottle, nor could she move her physical body. It dawned on her that she might be dead and stuck in some form of an ethereal state, disconnected from her physical body. Fear gripped her as she realized the gravity of her situation. Aditi was left with a profound sense of confusion and dread. As she contemplated the uncertainty of her existence, she grappled with the daunting question of what might come next in this mysterious realm she had seemingly entered. With no answers and no clear direction, she stood there, a lost and bewildered soul, unsure of what the future held in this perplexing state of existence. Aditi stood in her dimly lit bedroom, confusion and anxiety coursing through her. The clock on the wall showed 11 p.m., and her laptop displayed the date as June 30th. She muttered to herself, "It's May 30th, not June. Maybe the clock is wrong, or am I dead?" The idea that she might have been trapped within her body for a month, not even realizing the passage of time, sent a shiver down her spine. Her mind raced with thoughts and questions, trying to make sense of her bizarre situation. Had her soul been lingering within her physical form, unaware of the external world, or had she truly been released from her body? The idea of being a disembodied spirit sent a chill through her, and she was uncertain how to navigate this eerie new reality. Aditi decided to leave her room, perhaps hoping to find some clarity outside. She made her way to the front porch, the only source of light in the darkness being a few working streetlights. She gazed out into the impenetrable blackness, an unsettling void that seemed to stretch into eternity. A sense of foreboding swept over her, and she retreated inside, closing the door behind her. Back inside the house, she continued to grapple with her newfound existence. She realized that she was indeed a ghost, detached from her physical form, and her fear of the dark perplexed her. Her internal conflict deepened as she pondered, what kind of ghost am I if I'm scared of the dark? How will I survive in the spirit world if I can't even handle the darkness? The irony of her situation was not lost on her, and Aditi was left with a profound sense of vulnerability. The fear that had once seemed irrational in the realm of the living now became a palpable challenge in the ethereal world she found herself trapped within. She knew that she had to confront her fears and adapt to this new existence if she were to find her way in the unknown realm of spirits. Aditi's heart raced as she heard a knock on the door at 11:30 in the night, a time when visitors were unwelcome and unexpected. Her anxiety grew as she approached the door, her trepidation increasing with each step. She thought, who could be knocking at this hour? The second knock reverberated through the silent house, causing her to jump in fright. She felt a chill creeping down her spine as she moved closer to the door, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and curiosity. She hesitated, torn between the urge to see who was outside and her apprehension about the unknown. Unable to contain her apprehension any longer, Aditi retreated to a corner of the room, hiding behind a curtain. She peered out at the door with wide eyes, her breath quickening. The knocks continued, growing louder and more insistent, amplifying the thumping in her chest. As the seconds stretched on, she thought to herself with a wry smile, even ghosts feel the pounding of their hearts in their chest. The absurdity of the situation did little to ease her fear, but it did offer a brief moment of levity. Then, a soft voice broke the silence, saying, "Ready or not, here I come." The words sent a shiver down Aditi's spine as she watched the door with bated breath. To her astonishment, a small boy, no older than 10, walked through the door and into her house. Aditi couldn't believe her eyes. She continued to observe from her hiding place, unsure of how to react to this unexpected presence. The boy, seemingly unfazed by her ghostly form, turned towards her and spoke, "I know you're behind the curtain. You can come out." Still trembling, Aditi hesitated before replying, "No, I won't. You're a ghost, and I'm scared of you." The boy's response took her aback. "Even you're a ghost," he said calmly. Aditi blinked in surprise, unable to fathom the implications of what he had just revealed. She mustered the courage to speak again, "You can't just enter someone's house like this without permission." The boy, his eyes gleaming with an enigmatic wisdom, simply said, "I knocked 3 times, and you didn't answer the door. I saw no sign of you opening it, so I let myself in." Aditi's mind whirled with questions. She asked, "But how could you knock on the door if you're a ghost too?" The boy offered only a cryptic smile and replied, "I'll tell you when the time is right." As Aditi stood there, shrouded in mystery and uncertainty, she couldn't help but feel that the arrival of this enigmatic young visitor marked the beginning of an entirely new and perplexing chapter in her ghostly existence.